Greetings, my name is Dr. Daryl Ward, and I'm the College Advancement and Creative Lead for the College of Arts and Media here at Southeastern University. And welcome to a new episode of the CAM Podcast. Each episode seeks to enlighten listeners by providing intellectually stimulating conversation on political, economic, social, biblical, and historical subject matter. So thanks for taking time to join us on this edition of the CAM Podcast. Our guests today are Dr. Mark Belfast and one of his students, Ana Ramos, as they share with us how music therapy can be used to respond to a variety of student mental health issues. But first, let's welcome my co-host, Judah Crowder. Judah is a graduate student here in the College of Arts and Media, and welcome, Judah.
Thank you, Dr. Ward.
Judah, just so our listeners know, you're not only a graduate student and a graduate assistant, but you're also the music director for one of our large local churches. And I'd be curious in these strange times we find ourselves in with all of these different remote connections and social distancing and self-isolation. Talk a little bit with us about how that you see that impacting your choir members and what it means for a large group to not be able to meet as a group.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the choir and orchestra director at Victory Church, and I oversee about 100 volunteers. And my main task in this interesting season, outside of figuring out, okay, how are we going to go to doing church solely online, is really to check in on the mental health and wellness of my volunteers, because this kind of unique season that we're in has really produced a lot of stress and anxiety. Especially one thing that I found in just checking in on my volunteers is, especially with those who live alone, they're young professionals, not married, or old and retired individuals. They're feeling a lot of loneliness, increased isolation, anxiety right now. So my main task is really trying to combat that with hope. And it's been a unique task, something that I hadn't had to do to this degree before. So I'm still learning kind of the appropriate approaches to doing so in an effective way.
And I think that's a really good point, because regardless of what any of us thought this extended stay at home or isolation or social distancing would be, I don't know that most of us, at least those of us not in this particular line of work, thought a lot about the mental health issues that this could create and how that needs to be addressed. You know, we've talked a lot about the economic issues and the political issues, and of course even the social issues, but the mental health issues. And I just saw a report last night on the news talking about that. They were interviewing different mental health experts, because it's starting, as you said, to dawn on people. There's another side of this that doesn't get discussed a lot, and that is how this impacts our mental health issues. And I think that's appropriate, because our guest for this episode, Dr. Mark Belfast, is the Associate Professor of Music Education and Assistant Dean for the College of Arts and Media, and one of his students, Ana Ramos. Welcome, Dr. Belfast and Ana.
Hi, Dr. Ward. Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you.
Dr. Belfast and Ana recently did some research related to music therapy and mental health issues. And so we thought it would be appropriate, again, in this season, in this time, to have them on as our guests, let them talk a little bit about what they found in their research and how that works. So let's begin our discussion, Dr. Belfast, with kind of a basic explanation of what exactly is music therapy.
Let me start with what music therapy is not. Music therapy is not listening to tunes and feeling better.
Although that could happen, that's not the purpose.
Right. That's not the it. Music therapy itself is truly an established health profession. It is focused on evidence-based use of music interventions in order to accomplish goals for specific individuals based on the specific needs that they have. The music stimuli that are used assist those health professionals in assessing physical, emotional, cognitive, even the social functioning of individuals. Music therapists can then take that data, those data that are collected, and develop a program to help move that individual through time and through various interventions to the next level of appropriate functioning in whatever area that they have needs.
That's fascinating. So Anna, tell us a little bit about what your interest in this particular subject is. What kind of sparked that fascination, and then a little bit of depth on your research would be a great thing for our listeners.
Well, I'm a music education major, and I have a minor in psychology. I'm about to graduate from Southeastern. And the real reason, though, that I became a music education major is because of my interest in music therapy. So I've been researching different careers in music and kind of hit on this hidden gem of a career that's starting to explode, but is still not used in the mainstream realm of schools. And I discovered this field and fell in love with the idea of music therapy because of my interest in medicine, in psychology, in helping people, and my passion for music. So it perfectly combines all of those things. And so that's really the main reason I became a music education major. And so I went to Dr. Belfast, who has been a wonderful supporter of my research in this area, and he kind of helped me narrow down discussing that combination of the two worlds that I've been studying of music education and music therapy, and where they meld together and where there is a great need. I mean, we find there's a huge need right now for increased mental and physical health services in schools, and the rates of students, especially in secondary education, having mental health issues is astronomical. And it's very normal now for people to talk about depression, anxiety, stress. And music therapy kind of, to me, seems like a wonderful option that could, help in this arena. So I was very interested to look into that more.
And what does that look like in the field? So we've talked a little bit about the research of music therapy. What does music therapy actually look like in the classroom, or in some cases in a hospital room? How does
Mhm.
this music therapy concept impact someone in more depth?
It's a clinical profession. It is not music education. I'm obviously passionate about both, but the difference is music educators, their goals are musical goals, right? The music therapists, their goals are non musical. So that's the biggest difference that makes it easier for people to kind of consume the concept. A music therapist is a trained clinical professional who uses evidence within research. They're huge about getting the right research. So it's not just, like Dr. Phillips said, make you feel good, but what actual practices have been proven to help various different individuals with their problems. And so through music therapy, a professional can help them kind of learn some of those skills. A famous example that helped music therapy kind of blow up in mainstream media for a little bit was Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords. She got shot in the head, and she lost the ability to speak. And she was a wonderful communicator. And then the next day, she couldn't put two words together. Through the help of a music therapist, regained a lot of her ability. And there's plenty of information out there. You can go to musictherapy.org if anybody's interested in finding out more on that, or many other examples. There's a million different things that music therapy can be used for. And that's why one big thing that we hit on is that it is a physical and mental health service. It is both. It's not one or the other.
Great explanation on it, especially for someone who has heard about it, but I'm not as familiar with it. And I appreciate those examples. Dr. Belfast, so Anna's given us a great overview, as you have as well. Mental health's a big subject area, as she just alluded to with those wonderful examples. But you guys concentrated on school systems and how if they were, how effective they were in using it. So Dr. Belfast, if you'll talk a little bit about how you guys came to frame your research questions and your research ideas.
In the last, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years, we've seen an increased number of traumatic events, crises even, taking place within schools. There were only like two places where people were safe, right? School and church. People really started to have to rethink how, number one, how we protect children, and then number two, how we help children move on, cope when they live through situations like that. We've seen these events happen more and more in recent years. Closer to home, just a few years ago, was the Marjory Stoneman Douglas incident down in South Florida. Right before we started working on this research, a student at Lake Mary High School, which is about an hour and 15 minutes from Southeastern, that took her own life on the school campus. And that student was a member of the band. We know that there's a need for school children. We know that we're living in an age where school children are experiencing things that many of us never had to deal with. And we thought, why don't we investigate whether or not music therapy is being used to help these children today to cope with these situations, or to otherwise be able to recover from, or understand how to function in a society that is sort of living in a new world order. Even now, with COVID-19 in 2020, we have students who are finding themselves having to go to school online. We started in looking at how, to what extent music therapy was being used in school systems. We really wanted to know several things, like four kind of big things that that we wanted to investigate. First of all, in our part of the country, just in the Southeast, is music therapy being used in the schools? We just wanted to know what's going on right here around us. And then number two, we wanted to know, what were school officials' attitudes about music therapy? Specifically, their attitudes about providing music therapy services. Are they even thinking about or trying to get music therapy into their schools?
Are they even aware that that might be another tool in their proverbial toolkit for addressing student mental health? You know, I'm a former principal myself, Mark, and people ask me all the time, what do you think the biggest issue facing schools? And they probably expect me to say school violence or funding, and those are all, of course, legitimate. But I learned in the last year or two to say student mental health issues,
That's right.
because that's a field that I was, as a professional educator, I was not trained in. I didn't know how to deal with that. So your point certainly is valid. As a practicing administrator or educator, do I even know that this exists as a tool that I can use to help my student?
That's right, Dr. Ward. And to take that a step further, the financial issues, the violence issues, all of those things affect the students' mental health. And so we really want to know how administrators were thinking about, or if they were thinking about music therapy. And if so, what are the barriers to incorporating music therapy? What are the things that are stopping schools from using music therapy as a physical or mental health service? And then finally, if we were able to find some schools that were using music therapy as a service, what were sort of the approaches that those school systems had gone through in order to successfully implement those programs? How did they find the funding? How did they get awareness out? Where did they find music therapists? How were they actually able to pull that off? Because if we can collect all that data and then make it widely available to those individuals that aren't aware of it, then perhaps we might be able to have more use of music therapy in schools.
What about the physical side of music therapy? What kind of effects does this type of therapy have on the physical body? Could one of you expound upon that a little bit?
Sure, yeah. It can be as deep or as simple as, fine motor skills. Because remember, therapy is obviously always about what's going to help the student the most. So if they find a student reacts very well to musical stimuli, then maybe music therapy is going to be more helpful with those fine motor skills, taking rhythm sticks and tapping out, a nice, easy rhythm that they're following you with. And that might help their eye movement to follow the beat as you're playing it with them. So, again, a music therapist is evaluating. They always start just like any therapy session, evaluating the client, the student, and finding out what are their needs. If they are physical needs, then they address those using musical stimuli, but the goal is to bring about those non-musical physical growth areas in the students. Music is motivating. It's a natural motivator. Children are born with this innate desire to perform and love and respond to music.
So, okay, great explanation, great examples for the uneducated among us, which I include myself in. And I appreciate what Anna said because it helped it for me. is it's just like any other therapy or therapist in
Yes.
terms of the clinical process. So I appreciate that. Dr. Belfast laid out this great research plan. What did you both find out? Anna, talk a little bit about your findings with your research project.
So the main most important thing that we had to first figure out is, does it exist in schools, and if it does, where is it happening? How often is it occurring? It's probably less often than it is happening, you know. So that was proven true. Our numbers were 78% of the schools that we interviewed did not have, or I'm sorry, the school administrators we interviewed did not have music therapy in schools, and 22% of them did. So a way higher, you know, ratio of school administrators saying they did not include music therapy in their school services. Okay, we know most schools are not using it. Another big question was whether these administrators even knew that that was a therapy option that their students could be offered. And we found out that a little over half did know that it was an option, and that that could be a service offered to students. And there's this huge body of research that is showing music therapy is effective with all these various types of students. And through the process of inclusion in schools, there is such a diverse classroom now in American schools, and so there are a diverse set of needs.
There were many administrators that mentioned not being aware that music therapy could serve as a service. And that's because when you read the legislation, the IDEA legislation, it did not specifically identify music therapy as a service. And so it really wasn't until around the year 2000 that the US Department of Education published a letter that clarified specifically that if school officials and an IEP team, the group of teachers and administrators and parents that got together to develop the individualized education plan for these students, if that team determined that music therapy was an appropriate service for that child, then the parents could not be charged for those services. That the funding by the federal government would pay for a music therapist to come and give those services. You know, if music therapy can also be used to help a child to improve, then why not, if it's not going to cost the parents or the school any additional funding, and it benefits everyone involved?
Do those services exist in any kind of capacity form? Are there enough music therapists within school systems around to even if funding isn't an issue? And what did you find? You know, granted, your study has limitations like they all do, but what did you find in that regard?
The biggest thing that we found in that regard was that location is important. Music therapists, because the use of music therapy in the schools is still a relatively new concept, music therapists typically are going to be found in more heavily populated areas. The school system that we found that had the highest use of music therapy was in the Fulton County schools in Georgia. So we're talking at the Atlanta area. You're going to find there are significantly more music therapists in those metropolitan sort of areas where there are lots of hospitals, high population density, and that sort of thing. And so many of the schools, even if they wanted to use music therapy, they're not sure how to even go about getting a music therapist. Might have to drive in, you know, a couple hours from wherever they are practicing in order to provide those services.
This is truly a fascinating subject for me to learn about, because I know, like some of our listeners, possibly I'm familiar with the concept, but maybe not the nuts and bolts. Like, do you actually need a specific occupation of music therapist, or is this something that just maybe a music teacher at a school could do? It sounds like it's a whole lot. There's a whole lot more details involved than maybe just someone with a base level understanding of the topic. Just in regard to the next steps, Anna, what has this research led you to maybe want to do next, maybe further topics of research? Are you wanting to pursue music therapy yourself, or just tell us a little bit about that in regard to your next steps?
A lot of different avenues we could go there with that question, but first I would address your initial comment that to let listeners know, yes, it is different than, a music educator walking into a hospital and playing a guitar and, a patient crying and saying thank you, that made me feel better. That is charity, right? That is sweet, that is beautiful, but it's not music therapy. Music therapy is a certified professional who has completed their degree in music therapy. They've done a 1,200-hour clinical internship. They've passed their board certification, so you have to be an MTBC, music therapist board certified, to legally practice music therapy. So it would be ethically wrong, immoral of you to say, I'm performing music therapy if you have not completed those steps. In order to become a music therapist, I'll have to go on to further school, which is my goal, to go on to get my equivalency in undergraduate and then later my master's. And that includes, as I said, a internship, a clinical internship, and passing your board certification. And your internship could be in a school, it could be in a hospital, it could be in a nursing home, it could be with a private practitioner. There's a lot of area where mental and physical health services are needed to be increased, or at least more information figured out to help school authorities, because I think a lot of people just need more of it and they don't really know what to do. So that's something I'm definitely passionate about.
Thank you, Anna. I appreciate that. And that, so as we're kind of wrapping up our episode today, let's do that. Let's circle back around to what Anna said just then and touch on a little bit about what Dr. Belfast alluded to at the beginning, how the current situation we find ourselves in, Dr. Belfast, as it relates to the schooling situation during this pandemic. How might you see music therapy as an appropriate way to deal with those mental health issues?
If I can just take a step back just a hair and address some research, there was a really great study done by Farhan in 2009. The researchers were looking at children who experienced traumatic events and how that affected their ability to learn later on. The it of that research study was this concept of emotional dysregulation, which essentially means that when people experience traumatic events, there are parts of the brain that um, shut down, for lack of a better term. And so, because of that, because they're not able to regulate their emotions, and we know that emotions can significantly affect a child's ability to be able to learn, to be able to focus, to be able to concentrate, and things like that, we know that serious events, significant life-changing events, can affect a child's ability to be successful in schools. It could be that you were a student who was comfortable and were in a routine and you were doing well, and all of a sudden you got ripped out of that routine, and both your parents were laid off because they were not allowed to go to work because they worked in a place where people had to congregate, and you're having to drive to an elementary school to pick up lunch every day because you're not sure. And so all of these things might affect an individual, which causes them to not be able to focus on education because they have to focus on just life. Because music activates both hemispheres of the brain, it enables people who have gone through these traumatic events to be able to create new channels and new avenues and new ways of the brain connecting and operating outside of the norm in order to get them back into their flow state, right? Get them back into their stream of being able to function normally. We are having children who have been ripped out of schools. Some places are saying we're going back to school in a couple of weeks. Whether or not that happens or not, we don't know. But what we do know is that whenever we do go back to school, things will still be different. I am personally aware of some schools that within the last year have been completely booked up with their school psychologists, so much so that they could not even accept additional clients, additional students who needed help. And so if we're already at that state, and then an issue, a worldwide issue like COVID-19 hits, then we have to start thinking, what are some other ways that we can move to be able to help our students outside of our traditional practices or our traditional services that we've been providing to students K through 20. And music therapy has certainly demonstrated over the last several decades that it can be effective in helping children in all the ways that we know children need help in 2020.
Well, Dr. Belfast, Anna, thank you for your contribution to this podcast. Incredibly informative. I also appreciate there toward the end where you were making a really good point about our students on college campuses and not leaving out their mental health requirements and needs, and how music therapy certainly could be an appropriate therapeutic approach to helping them cope and develop systems, honestly, systems of hope that things will get better than they are. We are grateful that you folks you joined us again. Thanks, Dr. Belfast. Thanks, Anna, for being on the CAM podcast today. We do appreciate that.
Thank you for having us.
And Judah, my good friend, my graduate assistant friend, thank you for taking time out of your day to help me host the show. We appreciate so much all of our listeners, and stay tuned as we will have more CAM podcasts coming your way. Again, this is Dr. Daryl Ward, College Advancement and Creative Lead at Southeastern University with our CAM podcast. Thanks. Be safe.